Welcome to A Voice from the Hills. I'm James Warner, co-founder of Silicon Hills Wealth Management here in Austin, Texas. Today on our podcast, we'd like to welcome Adam Singer. Adam was Google Analytics Evangelist #1, and he and his team helped build out one of the largest online communities in history to promote GA. Whether you're an aspiring executive, a corporate leader, or a founder, Adam brings a valuable perspective built on experience. So I hope you'll join me and listen in as we chop it up with Adam Singer.
James Warner is the founding partner of Silicon Hills Wealth Management. All opinions expressed by James, his co-host, and guest are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Silicon Hills Wealth Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Clients of Silicon Hills Wealth Management may maintain positions in securities discussed in this podcast.
Good morning, Adam, and thank you for joining us. I thought we would start with maybe some baseline information on you, just some background, and maybe hit on a few of those seminal moments in your career.
Sure. So I'm a digital marketing professional. I've been sharing ideas online about digital marketing and PR and digital trends since probably 2002, 2003. So I'm dating myself. I'm an old. And through my career, I've worked both on the agency side as a consultant for brands like Berkshire Hathaway's International Dairy Queen to Darden, which is Red Lobster and Olive Garden, and back in the day, Smoky Bones. So a lot of consumer. Then went on to do a bunch of consulting for the more boring B2B brands like McKesson and Marketo and some of the like companies that do like monitor mounts and enterprise hotels and all that stuff. And then eventually I went to a company called Google in Mountain View. Maybe you've heard of them. Was there for about a decade. Then spent some time in life sciences and startup landia, and now I'm here post-pandemic, not working anywhere. I'm unemployed and doing whatever I want. So I think you're all caught up.
I thought you'd be the perfect person to come on and speak to, several different groups, the emerging executive that's kind of looking to land that first career gig, the founder and the CEO of the startup and small company, and kind of the team leader or somebody that's working through maybe a transition where they're moving from one place to the next. So lots of different areas that you're an expert on. So I thought you could help shine some light on some of those things. So again, thank you for joining us. I was reading your Substack, which is really awesome. Guys, y'all can subscribe to it. It's only $50 a year. Just do it. And you shared a story about your friend Eric, who was interviewed with a VC firm. Can you share that story with the audience and kind of what that means for someone trying to land that career starting position?
Yeah, I love that story. And Eric is a good friend of mine that I met many years ago, incidentally enough, through a marketing campaign I did for a client. Eric wrote a blog post about what I had done to get a client like all of this awareness and conversions from tech nerds back in the day. And so we became friends over that. And so anyway, long story short is Eric had always wanted to work at a venture capital firm. He has many posts on his blog about venture capital, and he wasn't an insider, right? He was just a regular guy. He was working, on the corporate side in tech, and it is a jump, right? Like VCs don't just want to hire just anyone. And he had gotten himself an interview with Union Square Ventures. They're run by Fred Wilson in New York. They've, there are early checks to Twitter, GeoCities, Coinbase, all of these, like, so they were early money to so many different things. Fred is just like a luminary in the industry. And so Eric was sitting down with one of the partners, Brett, and he had his resume in front of him. And he was like, here, Brett, here's my resume, just in case you don't have it. And Brett basically said to Eric, hey, man, you can hold on to it. And Eric was kind of puzzled, and, he's a curious guy. So he's like, well, what, do you have all this memorized? Like, why don't you want this? And Brett's like, I mean, a lot of people come in here with resumes. I've already seen it. But the interesting thing about you is you've written, over 500 blog posts about venture capital and startups. And so I already know how you think. And so let's have a discussion from there. And so, they weren't concerned with Eric's perfect back of the baseball card and, all the pretty formatting and a 12-point font resume. They were more concerned with how he viewed the world. And that was what mattered. And that, from that discussion was, why Eric was hired and brought in as a venture partner. And I don't think they cared about anything but just understanding how he processed the world. And I think that discussion was more important than anything else. I mean, I guess the resume gets your foot in the door, but he never would have gotten the job if he hadn't put in that sort of extra work that a lot of people don't think to do. And so I think for these sort of top high performance firms, you need to go beyond a resume, unless your resume is so shit hot and you were like engineer number like 10 at Uber or whatever. Okay, sure, that might get you in the door, but not very few of us are engineer number 10 at Uber. And so for the rest of us, we have to think, well, how can we shortcut someone's trust about us to give us a shot? And I think sharing ideas online through a blog, through a newsletter, through thank you for promoting mine, by the way, James, through a podcast like this, through video, through even, just doing industry events, whether online or offline, right? Like you're showing that you care about your craft and sector, no matter what it is. And I think it's so underrated and so few do it. And like the cost really is just showing up, right?
That's right. And you refer to it, I think, as the process of building your own sandbox is kind of that nice first step or ongoing step really in career development. Talk us through what that means to you and why that's so important.
Yeah, so a sandbox is super important because as you go into your career and you work for, an established company or a startup or wherever you are, unless you're employee like one or two, in which case your company is the sandbox, it's good to have a place that you can experiment with freely. You can ship code, content, products for an e-commerce store, whatever, without having to raise your hand and ask permission. And there's reasons for that, right? If you're at a big company, you can't just unilaterally decide I'm going to make the website look like this or I'm going to launch X feature for my app, right? You have to do that as part of a team. But now that the cost of shipping anything you want is zero now, with no code, with ability for anyone to run a Shopify store, start a blog, start a Twitter account, whatever it is. That's like a sandbox for you that you can run experiments on, try ideas out for basically the cost of $0, get feedback. And so that's a feedback mechanism that's going to help you improve and iterate really fast, a lot faster than if you're always stuck shipping in someone else's environment. And look, I'm not saying everyone needs a startup, but if you create enough sandbox projects, you might decide for yourself, actually, it's not that hard to start things. Maybe this is the catalyst for me to make a startup. But even if you don't want to work for someone else, it will still help you like level up in whatever you're doing faster, at least in the knowledge economy, right? Like for a lot of this stuff, it's still kind of expensive, though not as much, to do things like, like a lab experiment in your house. But now there's actually kits to like do CRISPR in your house too. So I think, there are other sectors that are picking up on the importance of giving people, the freedom and ability to run and ship things, which, I mean,
your sandbox could just be a passion project too. It doesn't necessarily have to directly relate to
totally
the industry. I mean, it's one of the things I remember about you is, I mean, I knew your background and all those sorts of things, but when we started interacting on Twitter, I thought what you did with the music that you put together was one of the most engaging things for me.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually personally don't think there's any value in me creating music, as a passion project for the world. I think the returns on that are like zero for myself personally or professionally, and more like, that's just a creative problem that I work on. I don't know that that's going to help my situation from a professional standpoint, but not everything you do has to, right? Like we can have things that make us human, right? We can share our recipes online. We can, if we have a screenplay, we can try and get that published, right? Like, and that's fun too. I think the problem there is when people start to think that our passion projects can be what put food on the table, that the history of markets say
that's a problem.
yeah. If you look at the history of trade, there's never been a time in human history that what you do has to intersect the market at where the market values it, or you're basically, everyone will just, do anything they want, and there's no value created. So that's like an adult way to think about this. And the cool thing is that now we all have so much time. If you work in corporate America, you can kill yourself and do 70, 80-hour weeks. I don't know why you would do that when we have automation, we have, great outsourcing and help. We have, teams that basically, like, your highest value is to make a few really good decisions and make sure they get executed right, not do a billion things. And this frees up your time for, to be able to participate in your industry or create music or do all these other things. And guess what? That's net positive for the economy, because no matter what your craft is, say you're really into cooking, you're going to spend a lot on La Crusette. You're going to, get all of these, support all these local merchants and get like local spices and stuff. Like, you're helping the economy there. So it's like, you shouldn't just be, work 24/7, which is something a lot of young people have always had a problem with. Like in America, we're obsessed with work. It's not generational. It's everyone. We all like to work too much. And I think, like, for my teams, I tell people, like, I encourage people to have side projects, passion projects, sandbox projects, whatever those are.
Well, I know when I was growing up, the quantity of work was always celebrated a lot more than the quality.
Yeah, it's not great. And there's a lot of that when you read stories about how people want us all to return to office. I'm like, but why does that matter? What matters is this dashboard on, the results we're giving, or, if you're in marketing, how many, new sales, or if you're in customer service, how many support tickets answered, and, the satisfaction of those, right? There's all sorts of ways to measure the results and not the activity. And so I think, like, that's such a dated mindset, is you need to physically be here. And I'm not saying you shouldn't physically see your team and have QBRs and have offsites and whatnot, but you probably don't need to sit next to them every day to just ship your regular work once you have your planning session done. So.
And now you were leading a team of about, I guess, 300 in the Bay Area when I don't think you went in search of Google. I think Google found you, right? Is that right?
Yeah. So Google is, they have a good referral program wherein, they acknowledge that smart people know smart people. And so I was referred in by a friend of mine, Louis Gray. He's still at Google. And yeah, that's really if you want to work at a big tech company, find someone. I didn't even want to work there. They emailed me, but if you wanted to work there, I would stalk, not like aggressively stalk, but find someone in the org you want to work on LinkedIn and send them a note and be like, hey, I'm really interested in your team, network with them a bit. And at some point, you can ask them to refer you in, and they get a bonus for it too. They're like incentivized to find talent. So yeah, sorry if you hear my dog barking.
No, that's okay. That adds to the authenticity of the podcast. I like it.
Awesome.
Now, is that Dash the dingo? Is that
is
so he's still the only animal I've ever followed on Twitter. So.
Awesome. Yeah, he's fun. And I originally created that account just to get more people aware of rescue dogs, and they all need homes. And, the rescue dog is loyal straight away. We also just rescued a puppy. Really sad story. Someone left a bunch of puppies on the side of the road outside of Austin. And God. Yeah. And, we gave one of them a home. And the puppy is a lot to train, right? Like, that's like the lift is, I don't have kids, but at the beginning, like, you're taking that dog out like twice in the middle of the night, you have to be with it 24/7. Like, it's a whole thing. And the rescue dog, straight away, they're already trained to whatever extent. But when you bring that dog into your home and you treat it right and you do all of the correct things, that dog, the rescue dog, will bond with you straight away, even if it's got a little bit of a checkered past. So I'm like such a fan, and dogs are such great animals. So I had cats growing up. They're not as loyal. They're not as trainable. They kind of just do their own thing. Whereas the dogs are, they're really a family member, and they're really intelligent, right? If you get, like, Dash is an Australian cattle dog, so he's a pretty smart dog breed. So yeah.
Well, cool. So now, I guess when you joined Google, you were probably either one of the first analytics, evangelists, or you might have been the first. What was it like to be at the forefront of all that?
Yeah, so I was analytics advocate one of eventually four, and so they either thought that role was important or they were slowly trying to replace me. I don't know which. But basically, the point of the function of that role was I saw a gap because Google had plenty of developer advocates. And so those are people that basically help out the very large, ecosystem of thousands of developers building on Google's APIs and products and whatnot. And that's great, but where does all the money at Google come from? From the ads org, not from the developer org. A lot of the stuff the developer org does help scale ad revenue, but it's still not. There was no one explicitly helping marketers and advertisers with analytics and measurement, and so I made the case that hey guys, anyone can run marketing for Google Analytics. Everyone loves GA already. It's like not a hard job. I should come and sit with the product team and figure out how to actually educate users, which is different than marketing. So we created a bunch of analytics MOOCs, massive open online courses for, measurement basics, advanced measurement, e-commerce, mobile, all these different areas of measurement to help educate marketers and get them to use our tools better. Because we know that if you use measurement tools better, you would see that Google ads are a high quality source of traffic. So you should buy more Google ads. That's where your revenue is coming from. But we are Switzerland products. So, we'll tell you if Facebook's working. We'll tell you if Twitter's working. We'll tell you if email's working. We'll tell you if, PR is working. Whatever's happening for your company, an analytics tool will tell you, those answers without bias. And yeah, I was happy to work there.
You and your team essentially built out that community on social media, didn't you?
Yeah, and we had a forum where analysts and marketers could pose questions. We had social accounts, all that stuff, and yeah, I mean, it's probably the biggest analytics community and B2B user base of any product. There's 80% of the internet uses Google Analytics on their sites and apps, right? It's something like that, and so yeah, I worked on that for, about 7 years. And I think that's the longest I stayed at a company. I think that's probably, they got the most they're going to get out of me. I don't know if I could stay at a company 10 years. We'll see if that happens, but I'm total ADHD. So needed a new challenge. And yeah, I'd done everything I could do for them at that point anyway. Their communities were built, all the processes were built, they're iterating on the product. So there wasn't much, like once we sort of created
just time
to onboard people and get them smart about the product and do all the in product help and have the right like email flows and education. And there was not much for me to do. I mean, I could have done more conferences for them, and there are a few people at Google who basically stay there and just do the thought leadership stuff, but I can't do that every day. It's not for me.
Well, let's drill down on analytics for a minute. How important do you think it is for today's business leaders and just to have a baseline familiarity with analytics, and what are some ways they can acquire that knowledge? I know with your early on with the program that you guys set up, it was basically a free program to allow people to get into that. What's the pathway today for somebody to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely take if you search in Google for Google Analytics MOOC stands for Massive Open Online Course. I would take that course because it goes through the framework of how you should think about measurement, and not just for marketing, but for customer service and sales, for developers, for all, because different stakeholders do different things with analytics, right? So yeah, and there's tons of free resources online. Really, the way to not screw up analytics for if you're totally new is all of the modern measurement tools, get to the business outcome, right? So set up what actually matters for you. And that's not going to be page views and visits to your site or Twitter followers. That's going to be if you're having consulting services, people filling out the form, raising their hand saying, I need services, and then actually signing a contract with you. So measure all the way to when they sign the contract, not just the form. So get to that end outcome of what's important for your business. And if you need to hire help on setting up tracking with that, if there's a CRM system you're using and you can't figure out how to get that to talk to like your ad tech stack, because you want all those things to speak with each other so you can you can tell Facebook and Google, hey, find me more leads like this one lead that actually, signed up and started paying me money, right? Because the machine learning systems can do that if you have them talk to each other. So you can make your marketing a lot easier by making sure that you're tracking all the way to what success is, what you want from the internet, and using that as a signal for wherever you're going to market. Twitter and Reddit and Pinterest aren't so good at taking that data, but Facebook and Google are. And then also tracking like all the indicators of success, like what are the, if you're running a newsletter, you'd want to see how many new free subscribers you have, and then figure out like per every 100 free subscribers, do I convert, 2 people to paid if I ask them, or 5 people? Like, what does that number look like? And now what that can do is give you the goalposts that you need to get to for the numbers that are further down the line that matter more from an economic perspective. So you do need to understand the KPIs too, and just do a little math and figure out, like, because ultimately you have to move the top of funnel to be able to impact the bottom of the funnel. But you have to know if it's worth it too. You have to know, like, is this working out for me? Is there something along the way I could improve? And so
you talk about the importance of having a measurement plan before you get started in these sorts of things. It seems like a lot of companies get started on that top funnel activity before they actually have that measurement plan in place. Do you find that happening, or is it not happening as much as it used to?
No, it still happens. And the only good part is it is always easier to figure out what to do with traffic, attention, and followers than it is if you have none of those things. So it's not bad if you went out and, if you were like a small business and, you had a local restaurant and you went on, like, you were interviewed by all of your local food blogs, you went on your local podcasts, you did YouTube videos, and you weren't actually measuring how many people that was bringing in the door. I think it's still okay and a good thing you did those things. Those seem like all obvious things a local restaurant tour should do. So it's like not a bad thing for you to go out and do digital marketing, but it's a better thing if, okay, now that you've started to do it, you've thought through some of these measurement things. And there's online, offline measurement solutions too. So if you were that restaurateur, what if, like, for podcast listeners, for Joe's local podcast, use this this code when you get to the restaurant, and tell your server, hey, I want 20% off because I was on Joe's podcast, and they have a code there. You could actually see, is being on Joe's podcast doing anything for me, or is it just making my ego feel good to talk about how great how great our dishes are? So there's ways to get creative and measure that. And like you said, it all comes back to having a plan, which I would still, if I were a local business or small business or new company, I would still bias to, like, even if you didn't know it was working, to at least go out there and start doing some marketing. Because again, it's easier to figure out what to do with some attention, some awareness, some brand than nothing. So
it's really hard to pivot. It's hard to pivot if you don't ever start.
Yeah, and the measurement zealot in me says, yeah, I got everything perfect. But on the other hand, the marketer in me says, no, because it's also not ever all perfectly solvable and attributable. I could have seen an ad and then gone to your site via Google search, and then Google's getting the credit, but really that local radio ad was the impetus for someone to query me. So it's a forever solvable problem at the attribution perspective, which is why you should just ship, right?
And you talk about the importance of integrating storytelling and data to drive engagement.
Yeah. So
can you give an example of who's doing that well, and why is it such a struggle for so many companies?
I think there's the joke that data is the new oil, and everyone's obsessing over who has user data. Now we've actually flipped it back. Now oil is the new data, I guess, because now oil is expensive again.
That's true.
But I think a lot of companies have decided that, there's a new startup that exists that can let us do X with our data, and they'll just spin it up and start using it without too much thought behind, is this really the right use of data? A good example of this recently on the what not to do side is probably Applebee's running an ad right smack in the middle of the Ukraine war coverage. And people were like, laughing because they were showing like the air raid siren, and then it cut to commercial, and it was Applebee's. So if you're Applebee's as a brand, like, do you want your ad there? And that, all of these ads now, especially on the streaming platforms, which I watch my, news through streaming, those are all programmatic. So yeah, you're letting all the robots make all the decisions. Does that make sense for your brand? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So there's another example of that is on like, the war coverage is just such a great example. So you could, if you were a marketer, you could easily have paused your ads for, whatever it is you were running on like the day that all of that, the fighting broke out. And that was like, you don't want your brand in that stream, right? Because you're just going to upset people. And now that all of these, there's a convergence of our personal, professional, social, global media into this one stream. Like, there's probably certain times you don't want, your brand to be saying, oh, look how great I am, right? And that's okay. And so, yeah, there's the human element of how you want to use data. And then on the creative side, I ultimately think that great ad creative, like, the ads that we all remember, like a great Coke ad, or the 1984 Apple ad that everyone remembers with the guy with the hammer, right? Those ads were done by creative teams who understand their users. So what you want to do is get really good data, audience data, user segmentation data, understand all your buyer personas, that's just fancy marketing talk for the different types of people who buy your product. Once you understand those really well, and you have analytics on them, then you can have the creative people go into a room. And the good thing is data gives you boundaries, right? So if you've never written a song, or you've never written an essay, or you've never done anything creatively, you need some structure to define what you're going to put on that page. And so your data will give you the boundaries, and now you can use your human creativity to work within those boundaries. And so that's how a great team would use data. They wouldn't just have machine learning algorithms come up with what your next ad is. There are startups that do that now. I would never use them, because if the robots can make better ads than your team, you should fire the whole team and just use the robots. Yeah, because they're worthless, and or maybe put them to work in something else. But if they are better, then that's a problem for you. So yeah, I think there's use data as guidelines for whatever you're doing, and that applies to a lot of things.
I think another hot button issue you referred to recently is the use of real-time data to drive direction. I mean, we see it in the media world and big tech quite a bit. I don't see it as much, or I don't see it as evident outside of those areas. How can companies large and small begin to use that real-time data?
Yeah, so of course, every single media outlet is using real time to populate what the front page of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or CNN or any site, they're trying to capture the zeitgeist of a given day and be the stories that people share and talk about. But they have a newsroom. They have a whole newsroom, and they have an editorial team that's working on that 24/7. So if you're a smaller business, you probably don't have a huge team, and maybe not even smaller business, just not a 24/7 news operation. You're probably not structured to use real time in real time, and that's okay. So there are there are APIs with real time analytics that you can use to help inform site content, help serve specific things to specific users. You don't have to sit there in real time to use data in real time. An example of that from my blog post where I wrote on real time analytics is this cool vacation rental company called Twitty. They do vacation rentals on the East Coast. You can get a beautiful beach house for you and your family. 5 bedrooms for like a couple thousand for a whole week, and it's a great vacation spot. You can bring your extended family, have a good time. It's I really like them. And what they did is they used real-time data to inform their search listings. So if you were searching for a specific type of vacation home, say you wanted to have a huge bachelor party and you wanted like a 9-bedroom place on the on the coast somewhere, it would show underneath that listing, there are 7 other people, there are 50 other people, there are 4 other people browsing this listing or listings like this at the same time. And so they did that. There's no human work required. It was just a little bit of code that anyone could find and copy paste. You can do this for your own site. And that resulted in about a 12% increase in conversion and revenue lift for their site. So they're creating a sense of urgency that you should make this conversion now. And we all know people are distracted, or people are not always ready to buy. And so anything you can do to nudge people to get them over the finish line from a conversion standpoint is great. And so that's one example of real-time data usage. There's all sorts of things that aren't real-time oriented that you could do on your site that are really easy as well. Things like A/B testing different calls to action. So for some, it's like things like don't miss out on the latest thing, right? Like that's like a classic marketing tagline: create a little bit of FOMO, fear of missing out. Or this offer ends in 2 weeks, right? Like create a temporal nature around it. And even if they're not going to convert right now, you can give them some time frame that they'll convert, or a spring special. And the cool part about that is you can, if you are going to do like a spring special, all of your emails you send out, all your ads you send out, you can tag those to spring special. You can tag those to that campaign. And then in analytics, you can see over time, did running the spring special result in actual users who went on to purchase more times from me, or did they just come in for that one special? And I wouldn't want to run this campaign again because these are people who just wanted a discount. So you can answer questions like that. If you for running specials, we talked about measurement planning. You have to do measurement planning first if you want to be data driven in that way. So for like an e-commerce shop, I would do measurement planning up front. If you're the small business or restaurant, it's not as important because it's never going to be perfect, and you probably don't need to sweat as much. So there's cases where it matters more and matters less to worry about up front.
And then that concept of determining ROI, the concept seems simple enough in practice, but I think a lot of people in mid-sized companies and smaller companies really struggle with that. How do they quantify? How should ROI be defined, and how should it be measured, and how does that help you? How does it help you pivot when maybe you don't get the results you were looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know how you run a business without understanding the return on, things like return on ad spend, right? Like why would you continue to give Google or Facebook or NBC or whoever more money if you can't answer definitively what the return of that spend was? And so I think a lot of the business world is conditioned to think that marketing is just a price you pay for doing business. It's a cost center. And I think the really sophisticated teams understand that it's a revenue generator, and to understand what that means, and it should flip your thinking on marketing, right? You should think of marketing as fuel on the fire of your business, not I have to do this. And if you do that, you'll get better marketers who are more excited to work on you than those who think they're pestering you every time they ask for more budget on more spend. So I think if you can figure that out, it's in the interest of your marketing teams, and it's in the interest of your C-suite, your executive teams. Your CEO and CFO shouldn't be like, they should see marketing as a lever for the business and not something that they sort of have to do. And how can we make this cheaper? If the C-suite isn't coming to you as a marketer and asking, how much more can we spend because we want to create, X or Y more demand, then that's a problem. I will only work at companies now that understand it is an investment and it's not, this intangible, immeasurable thing, because that's just not true anymore.
Oh, that's such a good point, man. That is right on point. I see so many people who see that as a constrained spend item, and we're only going to spend this much time or this much money or this much resource on it. And then it works, and they think, well, wow, instead of wanting to do more of it, they're just happy that it worked. And it's kind of, it's kind of insane. But let's talk about transition, because you've changed locations, companies, roles. I mean, the days of probably spending your entire career in one place or with one company are mostly over, I think.
Yeah.
How do you know when to say when, and what are some tips that you would give people for handling transition? It's not easy.
Yeah, I think the important part is knowing when it is time. James, you and I have both been in investments where we held on too long, right? Like it's a lesson you learn.
Well, I'm in one right now.
Right. Yeah. All the time.
Yeah.
So the trick is to being really good as an investor is knowing when to cut your losers and take your ego out of the picture. And so I actually think I'm better at that professionally than I am with investing. I've only been investing for like seriously for like 10 years, which isn't long. Like it actually cracks me up. Everyone thinks they're an investing guru for spending like a year or two playing meme stocks or crypto. I'm like, you're so fucked. You just don't know it yet. Anyway, they'll learn. But from a working perspective, because I've been working on my own web projects and for other people for a while, I figured out for me, if I feel like in the last 6 months, I haven't learned more than I learned in the previous year, there's some mental calculus that I do. Basically, if I feel like I am somewhere where I am not learning more in the present than I was in the past during, previous instances where I was really learning and growing, then it's probably time to start to figure out where to go next. It's a hard thing to put. I like the 6-month thing.
It's almost like a personalized Moore's law in your
as I was saying, because I've said it before, I want to like rethink the 6-month thing, because there are definitely situations now in a remote only world, and this hasn't happened to me, but it's happened to friends where they were hired really quickly because the company was growing, and it was clear the management team was either toxic, didn't know what they were doing, or they'd taken on too much funds, but really the demand wasn't there, and they saw the company was existentially screwed. Like in those situations, I think you can leave after a month or two. If you decide, look, these guys are in real trouble, or you're at like a WeWork type situation, I don't think it matters how long you've been there. I think if get the hell out, and then wherever you work next, if they don't understand that you're self-aware enough to extricate yourself from a bad situation, then they're idiots. You shouldn't work there either.
I mean, that should be a good thing. The fact that you're self-aware enough to get out.
You're cutting off a bad bet. So the value that you get from work, people don't get this. The value that you get from work isn't in your compensation. You think it is, but it's not. It's in your ability to learn from other people. And that's the thing that actually stops me from going full solopreneur. There's a lot of people who do that, but I actually learn a lot from other people in teams. And I'm such an introvert. If I was a solopreneur, I might never talk to anyone else. And that would suck, right? Because it's so great to get to learn from other people. Like, what a wonderful thing. And in a remote world, you can work with so many different companies and teams. And so I think the value you get back is like osmosis, learning from those other people, seeing how they do things, seeing what you're like, oh yeah, that's really smart. I never would have thought about doing it that way. And then like applying all the good things to your processes and practice. And then, if you're not learning from them, or you feel like the deal isn't good, then it's time for you to go. And maybe they can make it up to you financially or with more skin in the game. I'm also biased to companies that give you skin in the game. If you have skin in the game somewhere and it's meaningful, and you want to see it through, and even if you're not necessarily learning, although if it's going well, I think you will be learning. I think that's another reason to stay, not necessarily just salary or comp. Look, the world's a wash of money. Money's cheap. You can get it anywhere. It's not really, if you focus on that, you're going to be less happy, and over a longer term have less money anyway, than if you just focus on, experiences for growth.
Yeah, I think everybody worries about maybe having a stagnant wealth, but don't think as much about, the cost of having a stagnant personal experience and stagnant knowledge and things of that nature. So I think that's really good.
It matters way more. I mean, if you're, there's a great quote, education isn't preparation for life, it's life itself. I agree with that. And all education means is, you're learning, you're challenging yourself. Like all the happy people I know that are like my age, T plus like 10 or 20 years, like they're still working. They're participating in their community. They're doing something the world needs. They're creating a product people love. Like they're not just sitting by the pool. All the people I know that are retired early are miserable. They're like unhappy, or they drink too much, or, they're very hedonistic. And like that, I think, take vacations and have breaks, but also if you don't have meaning in your life, like that sucks. You're just setting yourself up to be a miserable human.
Yeah. Well, let's stay on the subject of pivots and talk about What do you think that companies are going to have to do? What pivots are they going to have to make to engage with tomorrow's consumers? Because it seems to me the consumer of today is quite different than maybe the consumer was 5 years ago, and I wonder what that'll be like 5 years from now. What changes do you see on the horizon?
Yeah, so the 5-year question is hard to answer. Everything is pretty insane right now. People are some people are afraid and anxious, rightfully so. Some people are, put their head in the sand and are like, oh, all this global conflict probably doesn't matter. It's probably a middle ground. Um, yeah, it's answering the 5-year question out is harder, but I think to your point on changing preference is real. So I've actually been working mostly on B2B companies, or Lex was a previous company I was working with. They're offering like individual shares of commercial real estate. Like
Mhm.
for like these types of like investment companies, it's also still a B2B sale because it's features and benefits. It's not, it's not something that's impacted by a trend in consumer preference as much, because there's immutable things like people want to make money. So that's not as impacted. But I think that your company just being aware of the water in which we swim. There's a quote from David Foster Wallace of, there's two fish swimming in a fishbowl, and one fish says to the other fish, "How's the water?" And the fish replies, "What the hell is water?" Right? And so the point of that story, though, is a lot of bigger companies get trapped swimming in their fishbowl, right? They're in their little bubble and they don't realize the world has changed around them. Whether that manifests as still having a product that hasn't been modernized, and that can mean a lot of things, right? So Dollar Shave Club, which basically shipped a D2C razor where they got so much traction that I think Gillette or PG&E, one of the big shaving companies, had to buy them. The only
Yeah.
thing that they did is offered recurring subscription-based shavers, because guys, we don't remember to buy new razor blades. So that they were basically just answering the market of what the market wanted. And I don't think that was a hard one to see, that there should have been a D2C razor company. I think there's probably a whole handful of other D2C businesses that people could create that haven't been built yet. I think that's a blue ocean. But I think that's one example of, consumer preference you probably could have seen a long time away. Jeff Bezos likes to say, they build for what they know isn't going to change for the next 10 years or 20 years. Like they look at the world, they're like, what's not going to change? And one thing they saw was e-commerce. They're like, e-commerce isn't going to change. So instead of, chasing their tails on social or blockchain or whatever other buzzwords of the day, they're like, we're just going to make our e-commerce experience awesome. The other thing they did quietly is AWS, obviously, with their hosting business, right, which is a monster. But that's another one. Like, hosting's not going to change. That's not something that, they started building these products like 20 years ago, and today they're awesome. And so that's another way to, because predicting the future is really hard. I think that's a hard thing to get right. So I tend to agree with Bezos on the, like, what won't change and what can you build an awesome experience on. And I think the other thing is, whatever your market is today, like, what could you do to shore it up and to solidify your moat? And I think if you can do that, you can insulate yourself from change. You can have people love you so much and have so much of a history with them that they're not going to care about X or Y startup doing something slightly different. They're going to be like, well, screw these guys. I have so much loyalty to this other company over here because they've given 50% of their proceeds to dog shelters, right? Like, there's any number of ways you could do that.
Yeah,
so
that's an excellent point, because in our business and in wealth management and other personal relationship industries, I mean, our most important clients are our current ones.
100%.
And so the important thing for us that we're always thinking about is, how do we drive the ROI on that relationship? How do they feel value, and how are we more valuable to them? And frankly, how are they valuable to us too? It's kind of the same thing you were talking about as a business. If we're not learning on an extended curve, if we're not learning faster tomorrow than we were yesterday, there's probably something that we're missing. But I think that's excellent advice in terms of, think about the things that won't change and focus on making the experience really, really excellent in that area. That's one of those simple things that you're like, wow, yeah, we should do that.
Bezos built one of the most valuable companies in the world, just doing that. So
yeah. So with that in mind, what's next for you? What elements in that next opportunity have to be there for you to say yes?
Yeah, I think a good creative challenge, product and team that I believe in and want to support long term. And I think for me and for anyone, you understand this better than anyone else. I think I just mentioned this before. I think having skin in the game, right? I want to have meaningful basis points, and I think like that's like the right carrot to offer for people. Some people go the other way and they think in a remote world you should just pay as much as you can. People should have outsized salary instead, and I tend to not think that way as much. I don't necessarily think it's a better world if we're all basically Uber drivers but for X. And not to say there's anything wrong with being an Uber driver. I think that's great. It's an amazing thing that you can do, and anyone can have personal freedom to do it. But I think that I think for certain industries, you want ownership, and maybe even for Uber drivers, like there's a way that they could have, some ownership. Actually, they can have Uber stock. One thing, see, like it's funny, the blockchain people talk about ownership, but in a lot of ways, like you already could have ownership in most of the world through public markets, through investment. So I don't really see that as a problem to solve with some of the newer tools. But I do think that for professionals, for career professionals, that notion of ownership is important.
Well, Adam, hey, thank you very much for spending some time with us. I really appreciate making the time for us.
Of course, this was fun. Thank you, James.
And that does it for this episode of A Voice from the Hills. Thanks so much to Adam Singer for joining us. Thanks to Caitlin and Annabelle for voiceovers and music. Thanks to Priyam and Yael for editing and producing. And just a reminder, you can follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever and whatever platform you prefer. Thank you again for engaging with us. And remember, we can only do our best work when you are here to listen.